Perfectionism is often celebrated as a virtue, a sign of discipline, ambition, and refinement, but the truth is far darker. It can be a quiet, relentless form of self-torture. Those who pursue perfection are caught in a paradoxical trap. The more they strive for flawlessness, the further it recedes, leaving a trail of anxiety, self-doubt, and emotional exhaustion. What begins as a commitment to excellence often transforms into an invisible prison, where the fear of imperfection dominates every decision, every interaction, and even every thought. Unlike ordinary ambition, perfectionism is unforgiving, relentless, and deeply corrosive, shaping not only achievement but identity itself. At its core, perfectionism is about control. The perfectionist seeks to anticipate every outcome, preempt every criticism, and eliminate every error, believing that self-worth is proportional to performance. Yet this control is always illusory. Life is inherently unpredictable, other people are fallible, and mistakes are unavoidable. The perfectionist's relentless pursuit is a response to an underlying fear. Fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of being exposed as inadequate. And because these fears are internalized, perfectionism becomes a self-imposed tyranny, a psychological cage that masquerades as discipline. Neuroscience explains part of the mechanism. Perfectionism engages the brain's reward and threat systems simultaneously. Dopamine-driven anticipation rewards progress and success, but the amygdala remains hyperactive, scanning for errors, anticipating criticism, and generating anxiety. This creates a state of chronic tension. The perfectionist experiences fleeting satisfaction when progress is made, immediately overshadowed by worry about flaws, consequences, or potential missteps. Over time, this constant vigilance exhausts emotional resources, producing burnout, rumination, and paradoxically decreased productivity. Psychologically, perfectionism is often rooted in early experiences. Children who grew up with high parental expectations, conditional love, or frequent criticism internalize a belief that self-worth is contingent on flawless performance. Every mistake becomes a moral failing, every shortcoming a proof of inadequacy. These internalized scripts persist into adulthood, guiding thought patterns and behaviors long after the original source of pressure has faded. The perfectionist is not merely ambitious. They are carrying a blueprint of self-surveillance that constantly monitors, judges, and constrains. The behavioral manifestations of perfectionism are striking. Tasks are delayed because the right conditions are never met. Achievements are dismissed as insufficient. Successes are minimized or overshadowed by the next challenge. Procrastination, overpreparation, obsessive checking, and chronic dissatisfaction are all hallmarks. The mind becomes a battlefield. Ambition drives action, while fear undermines it. The perfectionist rarely experiences contentment because the bar of adequacy is constantly shifting, moving higher with each accomplishment. Perfectionism also has a darker social dimension. It is rarely contained within the self. Relationships, collaboration, and teamwork are affected as the perfectionist projects the same exacting standards onto others. Criticism becomes automatic, empathy diminishes, and interactions are filtered through a lens of judgment. Friends, colleagues, and partners may feel constrained or judged, and this reinforces isolation. The very traits that might be admired as diligence or conscientiousness externally often mask inner turmoil and relational strain. Philosophically, perfectionism is a paradox of human desire. The pursuit of flawlessness is simultaneously a quest for security and a path to suffering. Nietzsche spoke of the tension between aspiration and acceptance, the need to overcome oneself while recognizing human limitations. Perfectionism embodies this tension in its most acute form. It demands transcendence of imperfection while punishing the natural fallibility of existence. The result is a form of self-cruelty disguised as discipline, a shadow of human striving that exacts a profound emotional toll. Moreover, perfectionism undermines resilience. When self-worth is tightly coupled with performance, mistakes are not opportunities for learning, but existential threats. Failure becomes catastrophic rather than instructive, Anxiety mounts with each deviation from ideal, and the capacity for creative risk-taking diminishes. Ironically, the perfectionist often sabotages potential success because the fear of imperfection looms larger than the potential rewards of action. Understanding perfectionism requires seeing it not as a surface-level habit, but as an intricate psychological pattern. It is an internalized narrative that equates value with flawlessness, reinforced over years through experience, culture, and cognition. And it is deeply paradoxical. The very effort to control outcomes and avoid mistakes often produces stress, error, and dissatisfaction, the opposite of the intended effect. For those trapped in this cycle, awareness is the first step toward liberation. Recognizing perfectionism as a pattern, not a moral failing, but a learned strategy to manage fear, allows for conscious intervention. Practices such as reframing mistakes, cultivating self-compassion, setting realistic standards, and embracing incremental progress can gradually weaken the grip of perfectionism. The journey is not about abandoning excellence, but about separating worth from flawless performance, understanding that imperfection is a natural part of human growth. The dark side of perfectionism is not merely psychological, it is existential. It shapes the way one experiences life, filters perception, and constrains potential. By confronting it, reflecting on its origins, and consciously adjusting internal standards, one can transform relentless self-criticism into disciplined, yet compassionate striving. It is a path from tyranny to agency, from fear-driven effort to purposeful, meaningful action. For those seeking to explore these hidden dynamics further, subscribing offers a way to delve into the subtle psychological forces that govern ambition, self-worth, and human behavior. The dark side of perfectionism is not a condemnation. It is an invitation to understand the mind, confront internal pressures, and reclaim freedom from the impossible standards we set for ourselves. Perfectionism is not simply a personal struggle. It is a cognitive and relational trap that infiltrates every aspect of life. The mind of a perfectionist is a constant battlefield, oscillating between meticulous planning and paralyzing doubt. Every task, no matter how minor, is scrutinized with relentless intensity. The thought process becomes cyclical. Is this good enough? Will it be judged? Am I failing in subtle ways? These mental loops consume cognitive bandwidth, impair creativity, and often delay action. The irony is cruel. The very attention to detail that perfectionists prize becomes the source of inefficiency and frustration. Behaviorally, this manifests in both overpreparation and procrastination. Perfectionists overinvest in tasks to ensure no error occurs, yet they may simultaneously delay action indefinitely, waiting for the ideal conditions that never exist. This internal tug-of-war produces chronic stress and cognitive fatigue. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for decision-making, is hyper-engaged, while the amygdala signals persistent threat. In effect, the brain is constantly mobilizing for battle, even in mundane or low-stakes situations, producing anxiety that feels disproportionate but is neurologically consistent. Relationally, perfectionism is equally corrosive. By setting impossibly high standards for oneself, individuals often impose similar expectations on others. Friends, colleagues, and partners may feel judged, scrutinized, or constrained by this implicit demand for flawlessness. Emotional intimacy suffers because vulnerability is equated with weakness, mistakes are feared, and authentic expression is stifled. Ironically, the perfectionist's drive for control and excellence often isolates them, undermining the very social cohesion that contributes to emotional resilience. Psychologically, perfectionism is rooted in a fear of inadequacy that predates conscious thought. Early experiences of criticism, conditional affection, or punitive environments teach the mind to equate self-worth with performance. Over time, this internalized narrative becomes automatic. The perfectionist does not simply desire excellence. They fear being judged as fundamentally deficient. Every achievement is fleetingly satisfying, immediately overshadowed by the anticipation of the next failure or shortcoming. The existential dimension of perfectionism deepens the struggle. Perfectionists grapple with a paradoxical tension between aspiration and acceptance. Nietzsche's exploration of human striving illuminates this. The pursuit of transcendence is noble, yet human limitations are immutable. Perfectionism transforms this tension into relentless self-critique, a cycle in which the very desire to overcome imperfection becomes a source of suffering. Mistakes, which could be instructive, are instead interpreted as existential threats. The fear of being less than perfect is a constant shadow, shaping perception, judgment, and action. Moreover, perfectionism erodes resilience. When self-worth is contingent on flawless performance, mistakes feel catastrophic, and even minor setbacks can trigger profound anxiety. Risk-taking, essential for creativity, innovation, and personal growth, is often avoided because the potential for error outweighs the reward of action. In this way, perfectionism is paradoxical. It seeks mastery but undermines the very conditions necessary for growth and achievement. Cognitive behavioral research reinforces this understanding. Perfectionists engage in maladaptive thought patterns, including all-or-nothing thinking, overgeneralization, and catastrophizing. Every error is magnified, every flaw becomes evidence of inadequacy, and every success is minimized. These thought patterns reinforce anxiety and self-doubt, creating a feedback loop that strengthens the hold of perfectionism over time. It is not merely a habit, it is a self-reinforcing psychological ecosystem, where fear and effort feed each other endlessly. Yet there is a path through this darkness. Recognizing the mechanisms of perfectionism, its cognitive distortions, relational consequences, and existential roots, is the first step toward liberation. Strategies like self-compassion, reframing mistakes as opportunities, and gradually exposing oneself to imperfection can recalibrate both thought patterns and emotional responses. By consciously separating self-worth from flawless performance, the perfectionist begins to experience relief, creativity, and authentic engagement with life. Philosophically, this process is a return to balance, acknowledging the value of striving while accepting human limitation. The perfectionist's journey is not about abandoning ambition, but about transforming it from a source of torment into a tool for meaningful action. It is the difference between being ruled by fear and directing effort with intention, between a life constrained by anxiety and one expanded by deliberate, compassionate engagement. Socially, this transformation has ripple effects. By relaxing unrealistic expectations, relationships improve. Vulnerability becomes possible, and intimacy deepens. Friends, colleagues, and loved ones experience the individual as present rather than critical, as engaged rather than controlling. In essence, the liberation from perfectionism does not merely improve internal well-being. It enhances connection, trust, and mutual support in the social sphere. Perfectionism, when understood and addressed, becomes a powerful lens through which to examine human psychology. It illuminates the shadow side of striving, the hidden anxieties that accompany ambition, and the subtle ways that fear can masquerade as discipline. Recognizing these patterns allows one to reclaim agency, redirect energy toward meaningful goals, and cultivate a life that is both disciplined and compassionate. Ultimately, the dark side of perfectionism is a paradox. It promises mastery but often delivers fear. It seeks excellence but may produce stagnation. It demands control but undermines freedom. Awareness, reflection, and deliberate intervention are the keys to transforming this pattern from a prison into a pathway. By confronting the fear of imperfection and embracing the inevitability of mistakes, the perfectionist can step into a life of authentic achievement, emotional resilience, and meaningful connection. Perfectionism is not merely a habit or a quirk. It is a form of self-imposed tyranny that constrains thought, emotion, and action. Those trapped in its grip often live in a constant state of tension, walking a tightrope between ambition and fear. Every project, every relationship, and even personal introspection becomes a battleground where the standard of flawlessness looms as an omnipresent judge. And yet, this shadow holds within it the seeds of transformation. By understanding the origins, manifestations, and consequences of perfectionism, It is possible not only to escape its grip, but to harness the drive for excellence in a way that fosters growth, creativity, and well-being. The first step toward liberation is awareness. Recognizing perfectionism as a psychological pattern rather than a moral failing reframes the struggle. It is not laziness, incompetence, or weakness that impedes progress. It is the subconscious strategy of self-protection. The perfectionist fears judgment, failure, and exposure, and has learned to tie self-worth to performance as a survival mechanism. Once this recognition occurs, it becomes possible to disentangle identity from achievement and to approach goals with deliberate, measured engagement rather than compulsive overexertion. A second crucial step is cultivating self-compassion. Perfectionists often interpret mistakes as moral failings, yet errors are a fundamental component of learning and growth. By consciously reframing mistakes as opportunities rather than evidence of inadequacy, the individual can reduce the anxiety that accompanies imperfection. Techniques such as reflective journaling, mindful acceptance, and cognitive restructuring help create a buffer against self-criticism, allowing effort to proceed without the crushing weight of judgment. Behavioral strategies complement psychological work. Incremental goal setting, breaking tasks into achievable, manageable components, prevents overwhelm and diminishes the fear of imperfection. Exposure to controlled imperfection experiences, such as sharing work before it is polished or delegating tasks without micromanaging, gradually recalibrates the brain's threat response system. Over time, the nervous system learns that imperfection is not catastrophic, reducing the chronic activation of stress circuits and liberating mental and emotional energy for creative and productive engagement. Relationally, confronting perfectionism enhances connection. By relaxing unrealistic expectations of others, individuals create space for empathy, collaboration, and intimacy. Vulnerability, previously feared as weakness, becomes a conduit for trust and mutual understanding. Friends, family, and colleagues respond not only to the reduction in critical scrutiny, but also to the authenticity and presence that emerge when the need for flawlessness is eased. The social ripple effects are profound. Liberation from perfectionism improves both internal well-being and external relational quality. Philosophically, moving beyond perfectionism is an exercise in reconciling ambition with acceptance. Nietzsche's notion of the tension between striving and limitation provides insight. The pursuit of excellence is valuable, yet human imperfection is inevitable. Embracing this duality transforms the drive for perfection into disciplined engagement rather than self-punishment. The individual no longer seeks to eliminate error entirely, but to act with intention, integrity, and courage despite it. Excellence becomes a practice, not a tyrant. The existential dimension is equally important. Perfectionism is often rooted in fear of judgment, exposure, and inadequacy. But when confronted, this fear becomes a guide rather than a barrier. It illuminates deeply held values, latent ambitions, and areas where growth is necessary. By stepping through discomfort and embracing the inevitability of imperfection, one cultivates resilience, creativity, and self-awareness. The result is not a life devoid of error, but a life fully engaged, where achievement and authenticity coexist. There is also a liberating paradox. The more perfectionists relinquish the pursuit of flawlessness as a measure of self-worth, the more capable they become of achieving meaningful success. Freed from the weight of relentless judgment, the mind can focus on the task rather than the hypothetical mistakes. Creativity flourishes because experimentation is no longer perilous. Relationships deepen because interaction is not filtered through relentless evaluation. And the individual discovers that life's richness is found not in perfection, but in engagement, learning, and presence. In practical terms, liberation from perfectionism involves both mindset and habit. Awareness and self-compassion cultivate the psychological foundation, while incremental action, tolerance of imperfection, and reflection foster sustainable behavioral change. Together, these elements create a feedback loop where the fear of error diminishes, resilience grows, and authentic engagement expands. Over time, the shadow of perfectionism recedes, replaced by intentionality, focus, and the capacity for fulfillment. Ultimately, the dark side of perfectionism is not a condemnation of character. It is a mirror reflecting the anxieties, internalized pressures, and unresolved fears that shape human striving. Confronting it requires courage, patience, and deliberate practice, but the rewards are profound. Freedom from self-imposed tyranny, liberation of creative energy, deeper relationships, and the ability to pursue excellence without sacrificing well-being. For anyone struggling with perfectionism, the path forward is both practical and philosophical. Recognize the pattern, separate self-worth from flawless performance, and embrace imperfection as an essential part of growth. And if you wish to continue exploring the subtle psychological forces that shape human behavior, motivation, and fulfillment, subscribing provides ongoing insight into the dynamics that govern not just achievement, but authentic, resilient engagement with life. The journey from tyranny to liberation is not merely about perfection. It is about reclaiming the freedom to act, create, and live fully, even in the face of imperfection.